the Heart of Law podcast. My name is Mirena Umizaj, and I'm your host. I call this podcast my passion project. This platform is a safe place where I get to meet friends in the legal field without an agenda, willing to share and be vulnerable and open so that together we can grow and transcend our limitations and fears. My guest today is a very, very special soul. She is one of the hardest working women in the business. She has accomplished more than most of us can only dream of. I have the utmost respect for her. Her name is Danielle Mason. Thank you so much for being here, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this.
Good, good. I'm glad. I know that, I called you out of the blue and said, "Hey, I'm doing this podcast and I want you to be in it." And I was honestly moved and touched by the reaction. You said you were ready to have a conversation like this. So I'm just really excited that we get to have a, free, unscripted conversation about you, life, and everything in between.
Absolutely. It's so past due. I'm telling you. I remember that conversation imprints on me. I still think about it because there was so much timeliness with what you presented, which with what was already going on in my own head at the time about just sort of the lack of these kinds of conversations and getting down to the realness of it all. We're trying to plow forward. We're putting on the face and the mask and the literally the mask, but there's also a figurative one and a metaphorical one that we've kind of always had. And it's been so easy not to talk about it. So you're bringing this up to me in a time where all of that was just really bubbling up, and I really felt like there was a missing space there. So
Well, I
let's
hope I
do
can
it.
bridge the gap. I really do, because my intention is to do just that. It's just I want to be able to be myself, and I want other people to feel safe to be themselves, because I think when people are real and authentic, you really get to, connect in a different way and grow a bond that, it's no longer a superficial friendship or a superficial encounter, that everything is meant to be the way it is for a reason. So
And
I'm
I agree
just
more.
super grateful. So I'm going to ask the question I asked everyone, just to kind of start us off, and just learn a little bit more about how you went and still going through this transition with the pandemic, both on the personal and a professional level.
Wow. There's phases to it because we've been in this thing for a minute now, and there's been phases of how I have felt and attempted to adapt to it, and then there's still being so many remnants. When it first started, I wasn't the one that wanted to go out and buy 11 billion rolls of toilet paper, but it threw me for a loop early. And a lot of it was I'm used to with what it is that I do. Travel has always been a big part of my professional life, my networking life, um, the friendships that you're talking about, because we all find ourselves sort of in the same circuit a lot. It becomes, in some ways, some people are more than just friends now, or colleagues. They're very much like family in so many ways. And so just the initial shock, I think, of having to sit still for the first time, being able to literally unpack my suitcase and put it up somewhere. you know all of that was just so odd to me, because I literally, pack it, go, come back, whatever's dirty take out, whatever I didn't get to stays in, and then you repack it again and you're off. And that was a little bit of a shock to the system. And then you phase into sort of, all right, this thing's going on a few months, so may as well start looking at what the silver linings are of things. And then I got to that period of, okay, yeah, if on so many levels this sucks, but on so many levels that the hustle and bustle of that life
Mhm.
um, causes you to miss so much,
Mhm.
causes you to miss what your kids are going through. And for my boys, and during this time frame, it's a crucial period of, going into teenagers and young men. And so I had to sit back and be like, wow, I finally get to be a mom for a minute. Um, and that got to be really cool,
Mhm.
for just thinking about and really taking stock of everything that I get to be a part of now, and the just the overarching environment that we're in. I mean, we're talking about the pandemic, but I'm sure we can get into a lot more of that adds to the weight of this time, particularly for Black people and for those of us that are raising Black sons. That's a whole other
Yeah,
adjustment.
because it happened at the same time. I mean, you had
Yes,
George
yes.
Floyd, you know,
Yes. It's pile on pile on pile.
unfolded.
So then you get to that place of, all right, I'm settling into being grateful for this time. We have no control over it, but there are really good things that can be focused on right now if you choose to focus on them. And so I settled into that place,
Mhm.
which felt good. And then I got sort of topsy-turvy again, because then you settle back into the, oh my God, I don't feel that I'm as productive. I don't feel as though I am,
Guilt starts.
yeah, that professional purpose,
Yeah.
all of the things uh, that I so are part of my identity and who I am as a lawyer.
Mhm.
That has been in so many ways stifled. And so then it gets you to questioning your purpose. What is it I'm
Everything. Your
doing?
sanity. Yeah.
Your sanity, the expectations of what you feel like other people are thinking about you. If they haven't seen you enough, or you haven't, haven't won multi-million dollars in a trial lately. And, is anybody sitting back going, Danielle, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah. What is Danielle up
All
to?
of this is so totally irrational. It's irrational,
Yeah.
but you can't help it. You can't help but go there.
Mhm. So you're married to your high school sweetheart and you have two boys together.
Yes.
So family life started very early for you.
Yes.
And the foundation is pretty solid. So when you're together in the house for months at a time, was there, even though you're traveling and you're doing a lot, what was the dynamic in the household when you were with your husband and your two kids? Because I know for me, for example, I loved it in so many ways, like you said, but it also drove me crazy because I wanted an outlet. Like I needed to get out.
Mm.
I mean, there were moments of tension and frustration, and like, I just need to feel normal by being outdoors and with friends and with people.
Mm.
So, was that the same?
So interestingly enough, I never have really had the stir craziness of the house. Um, I might be settling into it a little too, comfortably. Really what it is more for me is just everybody's around, so it's not that I need to go anywhere, it's just they don't go anywhere. You know what I mean? I love my home, I want to be in it. Sometimes I just want to be in it by myself. And so part of that shift is, it wasn't new for me to work from home, but it is new for me to work from home when during those crucial day hours where it's sort of peak productivity for me. It's quiet. Husband's gone to work, and Jackson's gone to school, and my oldest son, he's 24, he still lives here, but he goes to work and all of this. So, there was time that I could settle into my office space and have the quiet, or if I want the background noise, I'll turn it on. But if I don't, it's not there. And so my sort of moment was, they're just everywhere. There's no room I can go to, and it's just me. It's just they're everywhere. And
To this stage, you're like, I need a bigger house. I need.
Yes. I was like, in my mind, I thought we had sufficient space. It is not for pandemic living when you're all just on top of each other. Normally it does feel spacious, and it is. I live in a nice big 5-bedroom home. But it just, there are places, I have a little office set up in a nook on the side of my bedroom that is really kind of, it's in the room, but it's separate from the room. And, I can be in there, but when my husband works from home, sometimes he's in the room and it's just too much going on. He's on a Zoom meeting over here, and I'm like, I gotta get on Zoom over here. And then my son is in Zoom in the kitchen because I feel like he needs to not do it in his room. I wanted him to get up and go somewhere, even if it's not out of the house. So he's in the kitchen, and my older son is up here. So it's just like, where is there a place? And then where is there just, even if you're around, none of them can not have a TV or something on. So you've got constant buzz and in and out of the refrigerator and getting ice out of the ice maker. And so, I'm just, my travel sort of got me to a place where I didn't know how to come back to just the noise when I didn't want it to be, or lights on if I wanted it to be completely dark. Or so, yeah, I mean, it's an adjustment, for sure. But I tell you what puts all of that into perspective is we are so thankfully healthy. And there's some people right now who miss the noise. And so we've got to come to where we're grateful for the noise, because that means it's all right.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're living and breathing, and you're in the same household. It's hard not to distract one another, but like you said, when you sit back at the end of the day and you realize we're healthy, we're safe, we get to spend more time together and have more family moments, I think it offsets everything else. So definitely anchoring in that is important. So I want to go a little deeper with your background, because you have such a fascinating story, Danielle, and I didn't know this until we just recently started talking and sort of discussing your background. But you come from a family that was active in the civil rights movement. Tell me more about that.
So, if you're local to Montgomery, the name and you sort of grow up knowing. I am a granddaughter of the Smiley family. And my maternal grandmother, Thelma Smiley, was such a phenomenal woman, just phenomenal. And she had a ton of brothers and sisters and grew up on a farm, and just the life that you would expect a Black family to have around about that time. But the extraordinary thing about them, and sort of the lineage of it, my great grandmother, my grandmother's mom, actually had property conveyed to her through the work her parents did on land as slaves. And the plantation owner of that time actually was one of the kinder and didn't have anyone else to leave the land to. And so he conveyed it upon my family, and we still own it. It's in Snowden, Alabama, over 300 acres of property that was passed down in our family. That's sort of a legacy for all of us. But the interesting thing about my grandmother, she was the only girl, and it was, they still had a sense of it wasn't proper for her to work the farm. That was for the boys, but they wanted her to get educated. And so she was sent to learn from a woman named Georgia Washington, who has a middle school named after her in Montgomery, which is also the middle school that me and my brother and sister all went to. This is the woman that taught my grandmother. And then she came back and taught all of her brothers how to read. And they then went on to get educated. They graduated from high school and went to college, and then became professionals, whether it was in the educational field, being ultimately presidents of Trenton Technical College that's here in Montgomery, or one of my uncles became a dentist. The other one became his dental technician that made all of the equipment and partials and all that went in the mouth. They worked together. And my grandmother was a longtime school teacher, then became a principal, and I believe she was the first Black principal in Montgomery, Alabama. And then she went on to be what they called at that time, we're all familiar with what the PTA is today, but back then everything was segregated. So there was the National Colored PTA, and she was the president of it. And through all of her accolades in education, she was actually invited to the White House for 3 sitting presidents and advised them on things about educational equality and integration.
Wow.
And so she now has an elementary school named after her here in Montgomery, which, interestingly enough, at the time that they were voting on the name, Martin Luther King Jr. was an option, and she won.
Wow.
So it's a very great legacy, and it's a lot of pride in knowing the strength of that story. And it's also a lot of pressure, because the greatness that was achieved during a time that really was almost unheard of, and certainly in the Deep South, and certainly in a place like Montgomery. It's just mind blowing to think about sometimes. And yes, they were all members of Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church at the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was the pastor. And so they were very committed to all of the activism of that time, everything that led up to voting rights and civil rights in terms of the bus boycott and all of those things. They were very much a part of that.
Wow. I mean, what a great story. I mean, that makes me want to cry. What a wonderful story that is.
It's amazing to think about. It is.
Because I think as people, we're always looking into our past to see, to find signs of what our ancestors or, our parents and grandparents went through and how they overcame challenges in their life. And here we are, we have it better than them, and we're still complaining sometimes. And it serves as motivation, as inspiration, and not everybody has a story like that. So to be able to say that I am the granddaughter of Thelma Smiley and I belong to this family is just a phenomenal thing. That's amazing. Wow.
Can't even say any more than that. You're right.
Wow. So, I mean, but Danielle, I am so impressed with you. I didn't know the story, but now with the story, I'm even more impressed.
Oh gosh.
So
There's a lot of layers to this onion.
there is, but of course, I mean, we're human beings, and of course, there's a lot of layers, and we're here to uncover all those layers. So I look, you make everything look easy and effortless, but I know that both your personal and professional evolution has not been straightforward, especially if you're coming from a lineage of greatness and people that have gone out of their way to do things in the most honorable way and leave behind the legacy that they have.
Right.
But do you find so because you're a mother, you're a wife, you're one of the top attorneys in the country. Do you find yourself pouring from an empty cup?
Yes. But more than that, a lot of times I feel like such a fraud. Um, it really does shock me
Mhm.
to when people tell me what their perception is of me.
Mhm.
And it's very much what you just said. I know that everything just seems, you make it seem easy, and you make it seem, you know, to acknowledge that, that that's always not the case. I mean, definitely is recognizing a side of humanity that I think we all have, but I don't think always gets credited for me in so many ways. There are times that I may take on something and really just in my spirit be nervous about being able to do it, or excel at
Oh,
it,
yeah.
or succeed at it, to be able to keep up with the track record on everything. So there are some moments that I'm really like, whoa, I don't know if I can do this.
Mhm.
And if I get to the place where I express that, the response is always something to the tune of, girl, you got it.
Yeah.
And on so many levels I do.
Mhm.
But then on so many levels, right then in that moment, I don't.
Mhm.
And it can be very a little bit isolating and lonely when I really do feel that way sometimes. It it I don't think it gets heard for real. It gets heard in the way that we all sort of question ourselves and second guess ourselves, but not to the tune of, okay, well, what might make you feel better about doing this, how, something like that. It's not that it's dismissed, because it's
Yeah.
just assumed that I've got it under control. And that kind of thing is it gets to be heavy sometimes, because it reinforces something that I already need to let go of, which is this unrealistic expectation to be perfect all the time.
Mhm. Some of the people that I've had on this podcast who are, you know, some of the most well-known attorneys in the space in the country, in different words, basically say the same thing.
Mm,
And when I started having this conversation and asking people in a weird way, it made me feel good because I feel like a fraud. I feel like every success that I've had was just a fluke. It just happened one time and
mm,
it's probably never going to happen again and
mhm.
question. But I find this now reassurance as I'm speaking to other people about this, that one, I'm not alone. And two, it's almost like there is this always evolving like journey and path that you can't get comfortable anywhere. You have to always keep moving and you have to anchor yourself in the strength that you got this, but then you have to also figure out how to be flexible with all of the unknowns that life throws at you, and figure out how to tune off or tune out the voice that says you're not worthy and who do you think you are.
Right.
I think it's a symptom that we all feel. It's in our DNA, I think. I mean, the people that I meet that are overly confident, I don't really know what to do with those people. I mean,
Right.
we've met those people and we call them narcissists, like they're full of themselves. I don't know that I can hang out with that person. So
Yeah, yeah.
so is lawyerhood what you thought it would be when you went to law
Um,
school, or is it a whole nother world?
wow, what a great question. I think I, I have to say that it's been more for me than I ever thought
Mhm.
it could be. Give you a little backstory
Yeah.
into sort of my legal journey. It's a second career. So I was in commercial banking for 7 years before I became a lawyer. And mind you, that when you're a kid and somebody asks you what you want to be, I already had in my head that lawyering fit my personality and my loving to talk and my loving to sort of advocate and argue and all of those things. Very superficial things for a kid, but that's what initially attracted me to it, because I felt like I had those skills.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you grow up and you see more about what the law is and how important it can be and all of that, it added gravitas to that choice. But it never changed. But my life made me wonder whether or not it would be a reality. And the reason for that is the birth of my oldest son. I had him when I was a sophomore in college. And the really odd thing about that time, I was 19 years old, and remember, I come from a family that we just described, and haven't even talked about my father, who had his own self-made story and sort of became the catalyst for that, teaching me excellence and sort of instilling in me that drive that was really also very inherent. I was never, my parents didn't force anything upon me. I had a very natural desire to want to be smart and to be great, to transcend, to do something great with my life. But you add all of that to being young, sophomore in college, sort of the person that everybody even then looked to as, that girl's gonna be something. Um, and then I find out I'm pregnant. Now let me just, my high school sweetheart. We are married. That's my son's father, and we've been together since we were 13 years old. But having that baby was a really tough time and a tough decision to make. And I don't want to get into women's choices about all of this. Um, but I found out when I was 12 years old that I had a very severe case of endometriosis.
Mm.
And it was so bad then that at 12, I was told I would likely never have children.
Wow.
So, my son to me was nothing short of a miracle.
Mhm.
But I'm young and I have so much, and even on some level, some pressure
Mhm.
to not have him.
Mhm.
But taking everything together and taking into account my belief in myself, I reconciled at 19 that I could have this child, be his mother, and still not have to give up on being great. once I convinced myself that that was the case, there was no looking back. But of course, there was shame and stigma attached to all of it. I wasn't married, I was young, and I was this and that. Um, the statistic and the expectation is you're a young Black girl, now you've got a baby. What can you ever hope to expect to do with yourself? My attitude from that was sort of, don't believe me, just watch.
Yeah.
It became a very driving force to prove people that
You could do it
thought
all.
that would be my downfall, to
Yeah.
prove them wrong.
Yeah.
And so then my pursuit of everything was very relentless. I was adamant about not missing a beat in school. I had to leave the school that I was at the time, but I came home and immediately enrolled. I graduated on time. I then went back after I got a general business degree with a focus in economics, and then went back and got my master's degree. And at the time, I was working for the bank, and those degrees helped me elevate in my position. So I was working at Regions Bank and became, at 23, one of the youngest bank officers that they had ever promoted. Um, I was forging my path, and in the meantime, my husband and I were decided that we were ready to get married and be a family for our son together. Um, and it all just sort of, it wasn't without struggle, but there was a commitment to the plan and to each other, and to everything about our family, and sort of just wanting to say, who's to say what the timetable is
Yes.
for real?
Yes.
We I understand that there's a very traditional and religious or Christian way of looking at how life is to go, but I don't think there's anything unloving or unchristian about how my life has turned out, and the choices that we made for each other and together, that are still bonds that are strong right now today, and forever will be if I have anything to say about it. So, you know, what's the timetable mean when you have a desire? And it was after the master's degree that, even though I was good at my job at the bank, I didn't love it. It wasn't something that I wanted to, that I got up in the morning and I was like, let's go make these loans. I mean, there was nothing bubbling up in me about that. It
Right.
does.
It's to find purpose when you're underwriting loans.
Right. And you can look at it. I gave starter loans to small businesses that, people are living out their dream. And I think that there is absolute pride and value in that.
Sure. Yeah.
But there are certain portions of parts of my life that, especially growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, that I don't think that my race or gender had much to do to hinder me in so many respects. But that was the one place where I did feel, being young, Black, and a woman in Montgomery, Alabama, the guys that are around here that are developing and all of that, aren't necessarily, we don't travel in the same circles, if you will. And so building that kind of relationship would have been almost impossible. And then just having that sort of level of camaraderie, it wasn't there for me. And so law school became something that I could rethink about, because my perception of it was, if you're going to go, you need to go to the best school, and you got to be there. And I have a family, and how do you make all that work? How do you do the time commitment and the studying and all of the intense training that goes. Law school is very intense, and that was very daunting in figuring out how to actually make that dream work. But interestingly enough, this is one of the other great facts of my family. I have about 8 cousins who are lawyers. And during this time where I am thinking about that being an option, I'm watching my cousins graduate from law school and start doing their thing. And I just said, well, you know what? There is a school right here in Montgomery that I can go to. I can go to it part time. And, risky because the school was not accredited at the time, but also the same school that Greg Allen, who is the Allen of Beasley Allen, the firm that I worked for 11 years, um, is a product of that law school and probably one of the best product liability lawyers I've ever had the pleasure to get to know and work with. So couldn't count out what taking on that journey would mean, especially making the choice to go to that school. And would you be wasting the time and the money because maybe it's not accredited and all of this? That was a risk I took, and I went ahead and did it. But during the time I was there, the school had already made a commitment to making that happen. And they hired a new dean and all this new faculty that was well renowned. And during my course there, it got accredited and then became the school that beat out University of Alabama and Cumberland in bar passage rates. And then our advocacy program that I helped to begin started to become nationally ranked in these trial competitions and all of this. So, I've looked back on all of that, and it was like we took a chance on each other,
Yeah.
me and my school. And ultimately, that turned out better than I could have expected. And then, from there, I go on to be hired at the federal defender's office. I became an assistant federal defender, and the first one work in their trial unit and then their habeas unit, which trial unit was new federal cases that would be tried. The habeas unit were cases that had already been convicted but had an appellate arm that could be utilized. And so that's very heavy appellate work and then trial work. And I was the first to do both. And talk about sort of baptism by fire. There's not a whole lot of time to get handheld in situations like that. But learned how to try cases and learned how to investigate and turn over every stone and how to really advocate for people who going into it, all of the strikes are against them, all of them. And times by the time I would get the case, there would really be nothing I could do. They would have been had an informant with a wire and a video and a confession and all kinds of things. That was really the most challenging work that I've ever had to do. But there again, gave me skills that then made me, I think, attractive to Beasley Allen, which then leads me to civil practice that, now I'm working on cases that are on a national stage and I'm traveling all over the country and I'm representing people all over the United States and all kinds of different people. And
So
then, and then talc happens. So, I look at everything. When you asked me that question, I couldn't answer it without giving all of that, because is the law what I thought it would be? I would have never dreamed that I would have, from all of that sort of humble beginning and not so much elitism attached to it or anything that, what people would say gives you a leg up in the world. All of it was just very sort of grind and hustle. And then here's where it is. I'm somebody that that you want to interview me. It all is just very, when I think about all of that, it's just like, no, this is absolutely not anything that I ever would have thought when I stepped into this. I just thought maybe I'd have a shingle and be doing the best I could.
Yeah.
This is way beyond
A
anything I
lot,
could have
yeah,
said.
a lot of lawyers that I talk to that are in the mass tort world that are actually doing the work and are getting the kinds of verdicts that you are. Nobody in 1,000 years could actually dream that they would be doing that. It's like I get the same answer because I'm always curious to ask, how did you get into mass tort? So you're a mass tort lawyer, and a lot of people watching this probably, if they're not in the legal field, and I do have a sort of a group of people that I know that watch this podcast. But for those who don't know, what is a mass tort attorney?
So we handle cases that affect a large number of people in a similar way, um, that manifests in some kind of personal injury that a lot of times can be very catastrophic or even cause death. And for the most part, those cases are um, defective pharmaceutical drug and medical devices, because we the number of people who may be taking a certain drug. These companies count on there being millions of people to take certain drugs. And, we come to find after a few years of these products being on the market, what long-term effects can happen with that exposure. And our job is, you sort of look into it to figure out, well, is this outcome something that you knew or should have known about?
Mhm.
And more often than not, once we get a process going, and we dig into documents and things like that, we find exactly that they knew, and that they just didn't want people to know or consumers to know until they, got sort of recouped their money and their profits and all that. They expect it to happen at some point. I think they've gotten to the point where they expect the lawsuits to come.
Right.
But yeah, it's cases that we tend to represent. It's not a single event. It's not a car accident where it's a single person and a single defendant and a single incident. This is something that affects thousands and thousands of people across the country. And mass torts allows for a process where these cases can be um, dealt with in a way, because numerosity will not allow us to be able to try every case that would exist, but it allows us a process to sort of weigh out the merits of the plaintiff's claims. And hopefully you have a process where there can be trials. But what I love to tell people about mass torts, because I think there's always this misunderstanding that somehow mass torts and MDLs and class actions are the same. A mass tort can be a class action, but a class action and an MDL are different.
Yeah.
A class action, you have somebody or a group of people that represents everybody. Whatever happens to them happens to everyone else. Well, in a mass tort, because these are physical injury and personal injury cases that have a variety of outcomes and severity of those outcomes, you can't have one person be representative of another person's
Right.
journey with that. So ultimately, it allows all of these cases to be dealt with on their own merits. But because of its complexity, it has to have some sort of coordination for it to be fully dealt with.
Mhm.
If
Process.
that helps.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a great explanation. So you were in the talcum powder ovarian cancer trial team,
Yes.
and this was against Johnson and Johnson between 2016 and 2018. And you all obtained almost $1 billion in state court verdicts. What was that like for you?
You almost can't put it into words. Um, First of all, the talc cases just generally
Mhm.
resonate with me in a way that really no other case that I've handled has been able to.
How so?
Um, it's personal. It's personal for me. Talcum powder was a sort of staple product
Yeah.
in my home, um, in my mother's home, in my grandmother's home, in my aunties and uncles and cousins' homes. Um, you know, there was a real thing in our whole in just in my microcosm
Mhm.
of things of products that I used and companies that I trusted. That was so high up on the list. It was a product that, you know, I don't remember a time growing up never having it or it's not seeing it, or when I was buying and had my own children, and I have boys, but you know, I would, if I had daughters, I would have done the same thing,
Yeah.
because this is just what you do. And this is what you've been taught to do. It's part of your hygienic routine. I live in the South. It is hot down here. You know, powder as a teenager would be in my backpack for PE class. So when I first learned about these cases,
Mhm.
there was a period of just personal betrayal that I had to deal with, because this wasn't just something like another drug that I've worked. I've never taken that drug. I have sympathy for the people that have taken it and been hurt by it, and I can represent that.
Mhm.
This was very different in that I could literally put myself in the shoes of my clients, because you know, from my usage history and all that, it's not out of my head that I'm out of the woods for anything happening to me because of my length of time using it. So there's a whole personal thing to it, and when I sort of push that out a little further and talk about how my family, how it was, I also knew from such a personal place that that was the experience for a lot of Black families and Black women, you know, all women. But initially, just getting into it, I brought it to it my sort of communal tie to all of the basis for that, and then come to find out what it could do, come to find out all of the active steps to hide that and not say anything, and you know, all of these things. So but there's nothing else I can do in the law that I think that I would say, like at the end of my career, talc will always be, I think, the the litigation, the one that I think that if there was a calling on my life to be a lawyer, I think it was because I was supposed to be part of that. So when you take into account just all of that history in it, and that adds a lot to, you know, people tell me all the time, especially when I talk about talc and I talk about my clients, I get all the time, we can just feel your passion for all of that. We can feel it. It's palpable. You can touch it.
I've heard you speak at seminars, and it was during the talcum powder litigation. I mean, it's still ongoing, but this is sort of like the earlier stages, and it was just nobody. You couldn't hear anything in the room. Everybody was paying attention to you because it did. It you could tell that you were all in and you were completely dedicated to these clients and you had taken that cause so seriously, and it's great to see. I mean, the circumstances are not, but it was just great to see how powerful of an advocate you were and are to these women. So how was it, and some of these women that you represented, didn't, they didn't survive, they died of ovarian cancer. What was that like for you?
still and forever will be the hardest part of it.
Mhm.
Um, Jackie Fox was our first trial client in St. Louis. She lived in Birmingham, which is about an hour north of me. And I never will forget the first time I met her in person. I talked to her on the phone before. Um, but, you know, it doesn't come up in conversation when I'm talking to my clients. I'm not, hey, I'm a Black woman too, sort of thing. We just talk. And I've also been accused of folks not really knowing if you're talking to me. Um, you don't know if I am or not, but I don't think she expected it. And when I pulled up in her driveway and she came out to greet me,
Mhm.
the first thing she said to me was, "Oh, you're so beautiful." And she hugged me like only a mama can hug you.
Mm.
She did not expect to have a lawyer show up that looked like her. And that was a whole thing. Like, we couldn't even get into the case for a long time because she had to tell me everything. I had to know everything about her, and she wanted to know everything about me. And it was a relationship that I think sort of just formed on sight.
Mhm.
And I've never met anybody quite like her. And she was, at the time of her deposition, she was technically in remission
Mhm.
and was doing well, could walk around. She was still driving her car. She had a personalized license plate that said Foxy J on the back. And I just, oh, she was so feisty and such a beautiful spirit. And I remember in her deposition, she said so many wonderful things. But I remembered her saying that God wasn't done with her yet and that she planned to be around. That
Mhm.
was in May of 2015. By October, she was gone. Her trial was set for February. And, you can't help but just be mad. That woman still deserves to be here. Certainly life can throw a lot out at us and we're not promised tomorrow and all of these things, but if her dying from that, had she never used that product, she'd still be here.
Mhm.
And so
It's outrageous.
such a beautiful woman and such a beautiful reason to fight. And
Mhm.
she was the first, but she certainly wasn't the last. And in between the women who I went through that same process with, get you ready for deposition. And some of them, we just had to do the deposition because we knew that health was becoming of concern. And part of the evidence in these cases and the proof that we have to show is what she used and how she used it. And that's a whole story.
Mhm.
And that only really they can tell in that way. And, so that became sort of the part of it for all of the highs and vindication of a verdict.
Mhm.
I then would switch from that to the lowest of low for finding out that another one of my ladies died. And that's a really, you can't get further in the spectrum of emotion than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for as much as, on the legal side of things, the successes and all of that have been so great, but the costs have too. Especially in just my emotional capacity on this, because I don't just leave it in work hours, or shoot, I don't even have an office to go to anymore, so I can't leave it in another place. It's just here all the time, and it's with me all the time. And so I am so proud of the wins, because and only really care about the money part of it, because that's the only thing that matters to Johnson and Johnson and companies like them. They don't and won't do anything unless it's going to cost them um, something significant to think about how they want to do business going forward. But as a metric of our profession and what that means and how big that was, particularly at first, and, I mean, it's still big, but it took the legal world by storm, I think, back in those initial trials. It was so unexpected. And it was such the right thing. It was the right thing to expose. It was the right cause to be fighting. It still is. But for me, a lot of it is just sad
Mhm. Mhm.
and tragic.
Yeah, I mean, in this business, you can do the right thing at the wrong time and not really truly feel the reward, right? Because if you're losing your clients and they're not there to see, feel the win, it's in some ways, like you said, it's heartbreaking, but you also know that you're doing the best that you can possibly do for their name and their legacy after they're gone. So there has to be such emotional volatility in that process, and to stay focused and stay anchored in your job, in your profession, in your spirit, that takes incredible amount of strength, strength that you're not taught in law school.
No, no, nothing about any of that gets you ready for this.
Yeah, for sure. So you're now appointed to the plaintiff steering committee of the Emerin, Emerin or Elmeron?
Elmeron.
Elmeron, because it's new to me. I'm just learning about this. Elmeron Products Liability Litigation. What is your role exactly as a PSC member?
So we work together as a group under leaders. There's leads to our committee. Parvin Amino-Roya, Virginia Anello, and Paul Pinnick. And then there are a number of us under them to just help to get and corral a lot of the pretrial matters that need to get done, to set us up for a process for these cases to go to trial. So right now we're in a discovery phase, and we are looking to identify the people who need to be deposed from the company. We call these 30B6 depositions, people that know the most about what it is we are trying to find out about. So we are currently in the process of getting those depositions going. We're looking into the documents. So we've submitted some written discovery to the defendants. They have produced documents. We're looking through those documents, which will help us ultimately build our liability story for these cases. These are the kinds of documents we would look at to see what the company knew, when they knew it, what they should have known during these times. All of that leads to the corporate wrongdoing, which is part of the elements of the case that we have to prove. And so I assist with those matters when it comes down to any of that type of work that needs to be done. Certainly that's the phase we're in now. As we get closer to trial, there will be other things in terms of working on committees to pick plaintiffs who will be the best representation reputations going forward in the trials. So, you're just doing all of the litigation grunt work, so to speak. You're building the case, and that's what the committee works together to do.
Interesting. So yeah, there's always new torts coming up, and it's hard to keep up with. But you are one of the few women and women of color in these ranks. And I was having a conversation with someone about women in the mass tort world and their role, and PSC committees and things of that nature. And they said, look, there is a lot of opportunities for women and minorities in our space, but not fully recognized, or people are not taking advantage of these positions because they are available, and people are looking for women, and people are looking for diversity in these groups. Do you think that statement is true?
In terms of that, I'm trying to follow what your question was. So
Yeah,
I feel as
it's like,
though,
I was having this conversation, and somebody made a statement saying that there is plenty of opportunity for women in the mass tort arena, in the law profession, to climb at the top, meaning, be in these trial teams and litigate against Johnson and Johnson or companies like Johnson and Johnson. So they were basically saying that these positions and there is plenty of places for women to be in these litigations, but women aren't taking advantage of these opportunities. And I thought, wow.
I, I can't fully agree with that statement. And certainly, I think even more disagreement of that they're not taking advantage of it. I don't think that's true. I do think that we've come a long way in seeing more of these uh, PSC groups meeting better diversity thresholds. I think a lot of that has been pushed because judges have made it such a priority. And I think going into it, plaintiffs know that that's going to have to be part of your attempting to get a group appointed or get the right folks in there, that you're going to have to take that into account. But there's a couple of ways that these groups get formed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, depending on which way, may or may not be as easy to be involved in. So in some cases, you have the judge will sort of make it more of an open process. So the judge wants you to submit an application to the court for you to tell what experience and knowledge and gifts that you will bring to the process. And then the judge will take a look at all the submissions and then determine, based on who had applied and cases and how involved you've been in the litigation, all of those things, and then select a group. And, that's up to a judge. And I think some of them do very well in how they make sure that what they come up with is diversified.
Fair process, right?
The second way it can happen is if the plaintiffs group sort of comes together and decides this is a group that we want to put forward. And that has happened in a number of MDLs, and that was the way it was submitted in Elmeron. It was a proposed slate of names that the judge could reject or adopt, depending on if it fit what he was looking for in the parameters that he had set. So in a situation like that, there has to be some level of your being in the know or involved in even who is in charge of making such decisions about who's going to be in this group, and maybe there's some leadership thinking in terms of, we know we want to make this a diverse group, and we know diverse people that we can go to and ask to make and accomplish this goal as well. So on so many levels, I would agree that through those processes, yes, there's every opportunity for women and attorneys of color to have a fair shot at these opportunities.
Mhm.
But I also do think that there is a certain level of, I'm not quite sure how I want to say this, but
Why don't you tell me
a
what is
certain
it?
level of, there are firms and attorneys who still exert a lot of control over processes. I mean, we've come to learn there are certain firms that are involved in pretty much everything. And being in position to sort of work through a lot of these networks, because yes, there's opportunity, but yes, it's also still very competitive. And so I think there's it's not, I don't think it's as easy as anybody would want to claim it to be, but I also don't think it is a brick wall that can't be broken through either.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell me what is it like for you? Because you're a woman of color. So what is your personal experience?
Ah, you know, I have been really fortunate to have been asked and pulled into a lot of these positions. And through my career, though, I've done mass torts and been in civil practice now for 12 years, 11,
Mhm.
12 years. Um, but I've only had two MDL leadership positions. And a lot of that is because some of the work that I do isn't on the MDL side. The Talc, for example, was a big state court press, and that was the way our team started in the state court press, and I was doing state court trials.
Right.
So it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't on an MDL, so I wasn't doing anything. It just, I was doing another track of mass torts that did not necessarily involve my having to be on a PSC. And certainly, having the time to commit to something is one of your factors. And talc was 150% of my time, given the number of trials that I was working up, and then the number of, get done with the trial, but there's more to work up after that. And so I took a great bulk of depositions for plaintiffs, for treaters, for fact witnesses. And then for the women that were dying, would do those to make sure that we got their testimony before they passed away. And so there was no downtime, no breathing room at all. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity in these cases that is not necessarily tied up in MDL leadership. I don't think that is, I mean, it's very prestigious and it's a wonderful thing to have, and it's good work. But I also don't think it's the end all and be all of what our roles are as advocates, female, male, whatever. There are a lot of different fronts that we can apply this pressure on these cases, and there's nothing limiting that.
Right.
And I think there is a world of opportunity there.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. I mean, I think it's hard to speak on a very general way, right? Because there is a lot of politics going on
Mhm.
all the time.
All the time.
So it's, sometimes you don't know, like some of the moves are being made because they have to make certain move or because it's coming from the heart, right? It's like this wondering and questioning, but
And I have to tell you on that point specifically, you know, it really is such a fine line when we talk about this, because diversity is extra important, but none of us just want to check a box.
right,
None of us just want to be there because
right,
you need it to look a certain way.
right.
And so that can get very uh, uncomfortable in a lot of times. And, so it's one thing for us to get the appointments.
Mhm.
It's a whole other thing to be utilized
Right.
effectively.
Mhm.
And y- you can tell it's
It's for
when it's for
right.
looks. You can tell
Yeah.
when it's that.
Yeah.
And that's I don't want to check anybody's box.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I can be the package, and I'm always, everybody knows where my heart and my work ethic is going to lie on it, but I certainly don't want to just check the box.
Well, you are quite the package, my dear. You are. So last year you received a very cool award, and you were only the third woman to receive it and the first person of color to receive it. What is the award, and what did that mean to you?
It's the Harry M. Philo Award given by AAJ, and it is sort of an executive national level award that they bestow upon someone who has demonstrated excellency in consumer advocacy. And Harry M. Philo, who the award was named after, was someone who embodied the principle of really being that lawyer that cared about the client,
Mhm.
and anything that is said to me, um, that recognizes my love for the client is an honor beyond measure, because that is where my heart lies and what my focus is, and always has been and always will be. There are, as you were talking about, all those other things that can come into this work, that really can make things very uncomfortable. I'm very uncomfortable with all of that scene. I'm very uncomfortable because that has nothing to do with the reason why we're doing what we're doing. And that's the part I find to be important. And however doing it, I'm not the titles or any of that. I really couldn't care. But ultimately it's about the client. And that particular award, when I looked at the people who had gotten it in the past, to be amongst those names, and particularly in the realm of when we're talking about recognizing the value and worth of women and people of color in this profession, and for that to be such a short part of the list, it makes it even more heavy, the weight so much more to carry, because I can't let you down. I always want to hold that banner up and be that example for our profession, to be known for loving and doing what is best for people.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's such a different tune because in many ways, the world of mass tort, because of its nature, right? You've got mass, claims, claimants, and you don't get to meet all your clients. That at some point, these people just become a name and a social security number when they're in the thousands, right? And it's just the nature of the beast, right? It's that's how this world works. And so there is this gap, and attorneys, law firm can't possibly meet and talk to every single client, just like they would, or a regular personal injury attorney would talk to a client on a single event case. So for you to be in a position to have these relationships with your clients, to bring justice to these people, and still really foster these connections, and say that you're able to do that in the mass tort world, that's like really big. I don't know if you know that, but it's a big deal.
Uh, I really I don't even know that I stop and think about it being any kind of deal. I just do it. And a lot of times it makes me uncomfortable to get any kind of pat on the back for that.
Mhm.
Um, because I
Well,
just
I
it's
think
just what the right thing is, what we're supposed to do.
yeah, no, I think, look, it's a now I wasn't sure what the award is, and now that you explained it, I mean, I think there couldn't be a better award for you, and I think you fully deserve that, knowing what you've done for people in different litigations in the mass tort world. There is no other person that deserves that more than you, and I hope that you can absorb that, and your
Thank you.
grandmother is proud.
Thank you. Thank you for saying it.
So now I want to move to some big questions.
We haven't done big questions. Oh
We
my God.
haven't done big questions.
Okay. Okay.
Take a sip of wine. Here, cheers.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to be
Cheers.
the only one drinking. Cheers.
Cheers.
So, what are some of your limiting beliefs? Because we talked about you feeling like you feel guilt for being successful, or you may feel like a fraud, as if you have to be perfect all the time, and if you're not meeting your own standard. And the self-criticism, if you let it run, could be very destructive. What are some personal limiting beliefs, if you're comfortable sharing? What do you judge yourself on, that you shared a little bit earlier with me?
Oh, honestly, I think those things that were just mentioned, just getting over not being able to absorb some of the accolades, not being able to really own that,
Mhm.
to always just sort of self-deprecate first and be no, no, not me, not
Mhm.
I'm very apt to do that before I just say, thank you for saying so.
Mhm.
Um, and then sometimes just letting that self-doubt in those moments when I think something may be a challenge for me for whatever reason. And for whatever reason, that thing in that moment sort of stops me in my tracks a little bit. And it's like, okay, here's the moment when they find out that I'm not what they thought I was. Here it comes. It's now. It's going to happen right now. And that can almost be very, very unsettling. Because I think a lot of it is a personal thing just for me, because I have always been my worst critic. I have always been, for whatever reason, pushing myself to be better, to be better than anything, better than myself, better something that my dad would be proud of. And that's a metric that I've grown up with, that he sort of established,
Tell me a little
without
bit more
really
about that.
establishing it.
Yeah, what was the, because you said your dad was a self-made man, and
Yes.
he expected a lot from you. So
Yes.
there was a lot of that, but you were also driven. So, to
Yes.
what extent did he push you to achieve more?
The interesting thing about it is and especially in the time that I've reflected, I lost my dad 2 years ago. And I've reflected about him a lot in the last few years.
Mhm.
And it was in those moments that I think, I'm being a teenager. I'm doing something that he doesn't approve of, or um, and he's a very tall, big man with a deep voice. So he already was very commanding, and if he was mad, he was a little scary. And so, anytime I would do something, which wasn't often, I was a pretty good kid. But he would fuss and all of this. But the thing about it would be that I'm already disappointed in myself. So I didn't need the extra pile on, Um, but that extra pylon was sort of very instructive in so many things, because he represented to me, it was almost like, if I can't be proud of you, then nobody can.
Mhm.
And so with him, and sometimes with his expectations being as stern as they were, um it was almost like, I don't care what anybody else thinks as long as I have his acceptance and approval. But that seemed so hard to get, because there wasn't the in between time when there was the I'm proud of you for the things that you do well. It was, I mean, you were expected to do that, so you don't get any cookies for that.
Right.
But when you're not up to standard, then that is, you are just, I'm
Mhm.
done with it. I'm done with you. I'm done with it. And so psychologically, that played a lot, I think, on me, in sometimes some of the unrealistic expectations that I have on myself. But it doesn't help that I'm already that way.
Mhm.
It's sort of just a doubling down of it.
Mhm.
And so you would think that as I go through these moments, and it's very much an ebb and flow. You go through the I'm scared in this moment, then you do it and you knocked it out of the park, and then you're supposed to be able to think back on that and say, remember when you were scared that one time and then you did it. So I have a hard recall,
Mhm.
a hard ability to recall, to go back and say to myself,
Mhm.
why are you so scared in this moment? Because you know what you can do, you know what you're capable of doing. um it's very strange, but every time I somehow do it. I get past that point, and it never is the dread or the doom or the failure that I thought it was going to be. And even if, in my life, something in the past, going all the way back to, I had Jordan my second year of college, but then my second son, who's 14 now, I had him my second year of law school. And so that was another one of those moments where it was just like, oh my, what do I do? This wasn't in the plan,
Yeah.
for certain. And so it just, for every turn, it was something that made the road that was already going to be difficult just 10 times more difficult. But I have always sort of just figured out, draw upon something deep down.
Yeah.
But I do have a problem with believing in that and having faith in it when these moments come. It's still a shock to my system. It's still a scary thing, and it's still something that I am not always sure that I can do it.
Well, it's almost like you have to prove to yourself that you can do it every time. That you, like you said, you can't recall that you've been more than capable of doing that before. But somehow you feel like in order to overcome something new, you have to prove to yourself that you can do it. And then you'll just take a breath of relief and say, okay, yes, I'm still good. I'm still worthy. I'm still
Yeah.
successful.
I am enough. That
Yeah.
has been a quote that in the pandemic, I have really had to just marinate on and live in and walk around in. I am
Mhm.
enough.
Mhm. Mhm. What are some life-changing events? Obviously, you've shared with me that you had, your first son at 19, which by the way, I relate. I wasn't 19, I was 23 when I had my daughter, and I was a single parent, and I went to college when she was 5 months old, and I was 24 at that point, and graduated when she was 4 years old with her on my hip. And I was the oldest in the class, and I couldn't have the fun that all the college kids were having because I was too busy working and raising a child
Mhm.
at that age. And so I relate to that. And I think parenting, as difficult as it is, it has the ability to give you the patience and the focus to continue grinding, because there is no bigger grind than parenting, than raising a child, especially when you're 19 and early 20s and you have no idea
Oh, for
what
sure.
a baby needs. I mean, I think that could teach you or anyone some serious discipline and strength. And so, as hard as those experiences have been also, I think, a place where you can grow. But other than those experiences you've already shared, has there been another event or something that has shaped you, that has changed sort of the course of things that you didn't really see coming?
Well, there's a couple things. And going back to my son, my oldest son, Jordan,
Mhm.
I had him at 19, but he was also premature
Mm.
by about 2.5 months. And so that was really, really scary because he was very, very small and was in the hospital for a very long time. And so couple the fact that you're young and have no idea what you're doing, but now, this baby is so fragile, and they give you all the potential things that could be wrong, developmental delays and all of that. And so, that was really tough. He's 6'2" and weighs about 210 now, and perfectly healthy and fine and all of that. So just such a blessing. But I think, the more recent thing that has been a struggle for me, and particularly as we've been talking about my father and sort of his impact on me and how I see myself sometimes and how I deal with things. Um, I lost my father to suicide. And that whole situation is still one that I'm not necessarily sure I've come all the way to grips with. There are a lot of things in our relationship that were difficult between us, and a lot of guilt that I have for having not resolved some of it before he passed. Um, for always wondering whether or not there was something else I could have done for it not to have happened. And and what I did that contributed to it happening, just so many questions and so many regrets about a lot of it. And so, that has been a hard thing to talk about. Something that it's nothing I've kept a secret, but certainly nothing I have talked about publicly. Um, Certainly didn't at the time, and not because I believe there to be. I want the stigma around it to be removed. I do, which is part of what's leading me to talk about it now. Um, the only thing from this side of it is just knowing how hard that is for those that are left behind because of all the questions you get left with and wondering whether or not you had anything to do with it, whether you could have stopped it, whether you should have seen something coming, and any of that. Um, those are very hard things, and they're hard, especially for somebody like me who sort of lives a life of having the answer for everybody. You know, I have no answer for any of that. I have I have no answer for what I feel about it. And the whole process of it, like it was not an immediate quick death. Um, so there was a lot of turmoil after the fact. Um, Situations that had come up, at the time, because it was a gunshot wound. And as I arrive at the house and there are police there, and my mother and my sister are present in the home, um, they wouldn't even let me where he was. They wouldn't let any of us where he was. And then it started to dawn on me that police have come to a scene with a gunshot wound, and they, under their protocols, have to look at whatever may have gone on in the house, including, processing everything as though it may have been a crime scene. So in the immediate trauma of responding in that moment, I immediately had to put on a whole other hat. And now I'm talking to the police officers, and I'm not Danielle Mason, traumatized daughter who wants to see her dad. I'm Danielle Mason, attorney at law, and before you talk to anyone in this house, I will be present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, that you feel comfortable enough to share that. That is truly heartbreaking, and I'm really sorry for your loss. Um, um, you know, I don't know that I have the courage to speak about it the way you do, but I do have some personal experience with it. I don't think I've come to terms with it, but it has to take an incredible amount of strength to talk about that, because it hits the core. It hits home. I mean, that is
It does.
your dad, that is your family. So you're still, it sounds like, in the process of understanding what happened and grieving him, but what he's instilled in you, and the legacy that he's left behind, just by talking to you, is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I you know I want to, again, want to I've been using this moment, I think, and these were a lot of the things when we first talked about what it is that you were doing. There were a lot of these things that were, I was telling you, it's bubbling up in me. These were some of the things. And if we don't start talking about it, I mean, right now, I think one of the reasons why it's more prevalent in my mind, more so all the time, is because, the isolationism of the pandemic has made, depression and anxiety and all of that be very, very prevalent, um, in our elderly parents who are alone. So now, my mom is alone in a house now that I isolate so that I can still see her. But there's a lot of full life that she had and lived that the pandemic has taken from her. And so, I'm just on edge about all of that. All of what I'm seeing that is going on around us, and how people are dealing with this, and how so many folks are having a hard time with it. Um, we can't be afraid to talk about the suicide story, because we know it's happening around us. And if this story makes one person just keep their eyes a little more open to the
Mhm.
people around them, not to say that ultimately there's anything you can do. And I think that that's something we have to learn to let go of, that we could have done anything, but we can still be looking, and we can still, challenge ourselves to, so and so, I know they've been alone, pick up the phone and call, or drop by and set something nice on the doorstep, do something for people right now
Mhm.
that may be going through it, because we don't know if we could change it, but we don't know we can't either.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I think the pandemic, for those who were alone, are alone, people with health issues, and mental illness and anxiety and depression is a topic that makes people uncomfortable. And I think
Mhm.
the reason is because we have stigmatized it to the extent that we think somebody that has it is unable to function. There is a lot of functioning, sad and depressed and anxious people. They function every day. And you would never know because, like you said, people put on a mask and they
Right,
work and they go to a networking event and they try to make everything seem normal, and something is unprocessed, something is not right, um, and they don't know how to deal with it, and they just shove it down as much as they can. I think to some extent we're all struggling with those things. It's to having these conversations. It's part of that therapy of saying that it's okay to feel that is a
mhm,
passing emotion, that is a passing experience, that we don't need to hang on to the how bitter, how guilty, or how sad and lonely you feel for one moment. That is not eternity. And so
right,
it's redirecting people's attention, and like you said, the little details make all the difference in the world. So for you
right,
to be processing that, I think it's is and having this conversation, I think people that come up and speak out about these issues are people who are trying to surrender the pain, because holding it in is too heavy of a burden, and you shouldn't be going through that alone. And I know you have a wonderful family that's supportive, but something like this really sort of shakes the foundation
it
of
does,
someone, right? And
it
so
does,
I just, my heart goes out to you and your family, and the fact that you're speaking about this, and we're just talking about some of these issues in general.
yeah,
Your father is not the first one or the last one, and it continues to happen. I think, the numbers are alarming. But as long as we can be strong enough to have the conversation and spread some awareness that somebody can hear and say, by the way, ever since the first episode of this podcast launched, and we talked about these issues quite a bit, that people, they turn to opioids, or they turn to
mhm,
some vice that helps them get relief from the chatter in their brain, is that other people who have heard these podcasts have said it's so like nice to hear somebody in my that's around my orbit to talk about this topic, because I feel like I don't fit in. I feel like I'm a fraud. I feel like I don't belong. And like, I'm not alone. This person I've been looking up to, I thought they had it all together. They are struggling with the same thing as me. So
mhm.
I know that by hearing your story, people that are tuned in, whether it's them or there's a family member, I think there's a lot of value here, that people can take away. So again, thank you so much for sharing that.
I'm glad to have a safe space to do it. And, you titled this The Heart of Law. And I really do believe that the ability for us sometimes to allow ourselves to be this vulnerable, to tap into our emotions and humanity. Ultimately, I think that makes me a better lawyer.
Mhm.
It helps me understand, I'm maybe representing a client that is going through a very different thing. I may not have gone through that thing,
Mhm.
but I know that feeling.
Mhm.
I know what fear feels like. I know what pain feels like. I know what sorrow feels like. I know what all of that is.
Mhm.
And I truly think that if I didn't know that, and if I couldn't be open about how I feel about all of that, I really don't think I'd be anywhere near the kind of lawyer that I've been able to become. Because all of that has been just truly trying to just honor human condition, to give it dignity, to give all of that fear and pain an outlet. There, give it something to work toward.
Mhm.
um I think we do ourselves a disservice when we try to act like we're superheroes all the time,
Mhm.
because really it's in that humanity that I think um is what resonates with a client. And ultimately, if you've got that, it's not guaranteed that any of us, I don't care how good you are, it's not guaranteed that you'll win every time. But it's a win for me when I turn to my client and they say to me, I know you were there for me. I know you did everything you could. And I just thank you for being that. I thank you for being there, listening to me, all of that. That's the win for me.
Mhm.
And that's the part of all of it that helps soothe my own wounds a lot of the time.
Mhm. Mhm. That's that's extraordinary. I mean, look, when you're having moments of self-doubt, you need to go back and listen to this podcast.
I will. I'll make sure I get the recording ASAP.
Because this is you basically telling yourself that that's who you are at the very core. You are a human advocate, and people resonate so much with you. I resonate with you, because on a very fundamental level, we're just human beings trying to connect. That's what we need. We all need that. And so, if we could just set the ego aside for a moment and be honest with each other, all the boundaries just go away and we're all the same. I mean,
That's right.
we're different in some ways, but we're all the same. We all need the same thing,
That's right.
fear of failure, fear of rejection. I mean, that
Yes.
is a common common thing. What do we need? We need love, as cliche as it
Love.
sounds.
Hugs when we can touch each other. Yes. I miss hugs.
I can't wait. I can't wait to get together in person again. So, how do you reset? Is there something that you do to reset, to recalibrate when you've got a lot going on, or that you are in this emotional sort of space where you're trying to process things, whether it is, joy or pain? Like, what do you do to recalibrate to kind of get yourself back into focus?
Really, I would love to say that, I do something real cool like yoga or something. But, what I do is I just stop a minute,
Mhm.
you know, I just stop a minute, eh, and just sort of let myself feel what I need to feel.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes when we keep just trying to press through, press through, press through, you're operating, but you're not present. You're more of a robot, I think, in that moment. You're just getting through the motions or getting through the day.
Mhm.
Well, I just stop and really it's just just let me be for a minute. I
Mhm.
may not do anything in that time frame. And it may be I stop for an hour. It may be that I stop for tonight. And then when I get up in the morning,
Mhm.
it'll be different. I just stop. I don't try to fill the time with something when
Mhm.
I'm in my head talking about what I need to be doing and why I'm, and being anxious about it because I haven't done it yet. It's just stop. I'm not
Yeah.
going to just stop.
Mhm.
And that right now has been sort of my go-to thing. Now, I want to graduate to something cool like yoga and meditation.
You should try meditation. I mean, I started with 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know I've done it before. All that I haven't committed to a routine, but it's that kind of stuff that I want.
Yeah.
I want to,
Have a practice of
drink
self-love.
drink tea and you sort of do some
I
things
mean,
that
look,
are
you have
innerly holistic. Maybe do more a little self pampering, take a bubble bath. Just that. But the first thing before it doesn't require any setup, doesn't require any equipment, just stop a minute. Just try to stop and
to
stop thinking about the mental Rolodex.
yeah.
Just
Yeah.
don't put any I don't put any expectations on my time. I don't look back on it and say, you really should have done this during that time. I'm giving myself that pass
Mhm.
and really just sort of settling into in the moments when you're not okay, it's okay to not be okay right then.
Yeah. Right. Be in the moment with whether it's grief or
Right.
joy or whatever.
Right.
What is it that people don't know about you? Because typically you are the life of the party. You're always having a good time. When I see you, you're
Oh,
you're such a social butterfly. But what is it that I don't know or people like me don't know about
that I mean, I am that person, but I am so not.
you?
And it really folks are like, "No, can't believe it." Absolutely. I absolutely am just fine being quiet,
Mhm.
watching something on Netflix, reading a book, not talking, not dancing, not telling jokes, not entertaining anyone.
Karaoke.
I'm so okay being alone and quiet. And so really like during this pandemic, I went through a little bit of a period where I was missing the travel because I was more missing my friends, that I would see. But I really just have not been like at this point itching for the next trip. I'm just not. And so I hear all my other friends, they're so excited and they want to go. And so in my mind, I'm like, I don't know that I want to do the first gathering that we're all at, because I think everybody's just going to be a little too extra and there's not going to be any distancing at all. And and I still am in that place of boundaries. I'm gonna have to sort of ease into some things. So I really am so comfortable being quiet but I can be that person. And, I just hope when we do go back to normal, I think that some of that is going to manifest in me. I will still be having fun, but probably not as much. And I hope that that is okay on some level because I'm, there is that side of me that just doesn't need to be that all the time, or really that's just not
Mhm.
most naturally who I am, but I certainly can be. And I really can't wait for a safe time for that to be the case again. But yeah, I think a lot of people are very shocked when I say that I am not necessarily the first one looking to be at the party these days
No, I
in
mean,
particular.
I think there is a lot of beauty in being alone and being in silence and reflecting, not necessarily getting caught in a hamster wheel of negative thoughts, but certainly learning how to be
Yeah.
comfortable with yourself
Yeah.
and be okay in those moments. I mean, I miss traveling. I love traveling. Does something for me. It allows me to distance myself from
Yes.
what I've got going on and sort of gain perspective and see, oh my gosh, like I have it so good. I am so lucky.
It
I
really is a glamorous life on
you
so
know,
many levels.
so many levels. And then the people are, honestly, most of the people in our space, in our business are good people, hardworking
Yes.
people. Um,
Yes.
People that have purpose, and if they don't immediately, they're certainly searching for it. So you can tell that these are intelligent, driven people. And so I love being around that energy. But I certainly, like you, have developed this desire and need to spend more time with my family and with myself. Like I'm eating better and I'm working out a little more than usual, which it was impossible to do before.
Yeah.
But I just can pace myself more, and I like
Yeah.
that. It feels healthy,
It does. It does feel healthy. I agree. I
So,
agree.
but when
I'm
we get
sure.
together, I know we will
It'll be a time.
be a good time.
It will be. Cheers.
Cheers, Danielle.
Absolutely.
It has been such a pleasure to have you on. This is everything that I wanted it to be and more, for opening your heart and for being a good, wonderful human being and a good friend, and allowing me to get a deeper look into you and into your life. And I just have greater appreciation for the woman that you are. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for asking me. Thank you for allowing this to be part of my healing journey. And I hope it resonates with anyone who watches it. Maybe they see a little piece of it and they learn to be okay with being not okay and being okay with, you're enough.
Mhm.
Just remember that you're enough.
It's a beautiful message to close this out with. So yeah, thank you. I will see you very soon, I hope.
I
And
hope so too.
Zoom is great, so we can
It
do
is.
that.
Let's catch up anytime. Anytime. This has been a lot of fun and very helpful to me personally. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I love you.
I love you. Good night.
Night.